The presidential election in the United States is rigged. You want to know why? I'll tell you why. But first, one important thing to understand is that the American people can defeat this. Unfortunately, every 4 years, the majority of us are fooled into thinking we cannot. Here's how. Imagine if we were all going to vote on what flavor of ice cream was available for the next 4 years. When you're asked what flavor you are going to vote for, it's, will it be mayonnaise or ketchup? Wait, what? Why are these the choices? Aren't there other good choices to choose from? Well, yeah, there are, but these are the only two that have a chance of winning. And since you hate mayonnaise so much, you end up voting for ketchup so you don't have to eat mayo ice cream for the next 4 years. You'll settle for ketchup flavored ice cream because even though you don't like it, you're afraid of getting something worse. This is exactly what is happening with our presidential election every 4 years. Most people are convinced that they have to choose one of the two people that are horrible, even though other choices are available. Why? Because of the reinforced manipulation and belief that these are the two we have to choose from. Here's how it works. First, let's talk about the Commission on Presidential Debates. This is who decides who gets to be up on the debate stage with all of America watching. It's a committee based of mostly those with Republican and Democratic party ties. They have 3 criteria they use to determine who gets to debate. The first is pretty straightforward. Evidence of constitutional eligibility. Must be at least 35 years of age, natural born citizen, etc. Second is evidence of ballot access. The Republican and Democratic nominee is automatically on the ballot in many states every election year because they are considered to be major party status. More on that later. Libertarian nominee Jo Jorgensen is also on the ballot in every state. Green Party nominee Howie Hawkins is on the ballot in 29 states, plus District of Columbia and Guam. He can also be a write-in vote in 17 other states. So both of these candidates meet that criteria. The third one, this is the kicker, and this is where the corruption comes in. Indicators of electoral support. The CPD's third criterion requires that the candidate have a level of support of at least 15% of the national electorate as determined by 5 national public opinion polling organizations selected by the CPD. But here's the problem with that. The polls they choose only list the 2 major party candidates as options. I mean, let's take a look. ABC Washington Post poll, Biden or Trump. CNN poll, Biden or Trump. Fox News poll, Biden or Trump. NBC Wall Street Journal poll, Biden or Trump. NPR PBS Morris poll, Biden or Trump. Here's what the average of all polls looked like in August of 2020. So how is any other candidate ever supposed to poll at 15% when they are not an option? It's impossible. How is this fair to the American people? How is this even legal? It makes no sense. Even if you don't agree with the other candidates, you should at least agree that we should not have this freedom of choice taken away from us. In the future, there may be a candidate that fits 100% of your morals, but they're blocked by this system. So because the public never gets to hear this person on the national stage alongside the others on TV with all of America watching, they're convinced that this person has no chance. You may want cookies and cream or chocolate ice cream, but you're convinced you have to choose mayo or ketchup because of the illusion that they're the only 2 realistic choices. They're the only ones on TV. The establishment tries to keep you in the dark. They try to tell you you have to vote for one of them. And every 4 years, it works. The second part of this is public funding available to these parties. Do you ever wonder why you never hear from qualified candidates outside of the Democrats or Republicans? It's because they are eligible for public campaign funding grants that others are not. The grants made available to them for the 2020 race are 103.7 million. Do you know how much Libertarian and Green parties and all the others get? Zero. When people say they've never heard of this person or they aren't doing very good in marketing their campaign, this is why. They don't have the money available to them that the other major parties have, as well as very little coverage from all the major news networks. Why don't they get this type of funding? It's because of the 5% and 25% thresholds. Here is what determines if a party obtains major or minor party status. If a party's nominee achieves between 5 and 25% of the popular vote in the general election, they become a minor party. This means they're now eligible for public campaign funding in the forthcoming election. They won't get as much funding that is available to the major parties. It will be in proportion to the percentage of the popular vote they received. But we're talking millions of dollars they can use for campaign marketing that they never had before. In the next election, everyone will actually hear from them and know who they are. They'll know what they represent, and they'll know that there is another option. This is why it's important to vote for who you believe is the best candidate that represents your values instead of voting for the second worst due to your hate for one particular candidate. Many people were preaching this in 2016 when Gary Johnson was the Libertarian nominee. Had he hit that 5% threshold in the popular vote, the landscape of this year's election would have looked a lot different. There would be a legitimate choice. But too many people thought it was a wasted vote. They said this election is too important to vote third party, just like they do in every other election. How is it that every election is the most important election of our lifetime? If people keep repeating this, it's just going to be the same thing 4 years from now. If a party's nominee gets at least 25% of the popular vote, then that party now becomes a major party, just like the Democrats and Republicans. They get the same amount of public funding as the other parties, and in most states they get that automatic ballot access. And they are almost for sure to be in the debates for the next election. This is why they try to keep you in the dark on your options. This is why they try to keep them off the debate stage. It creates a cycle that just repeats itself every 4 years. People are convinced that it's a wasted vote. In turn, they receive no funding, no party status change, they don't get into the debates, rinse, repeat. It just keeps happening over and over and over again. If all of the people who said this or believed it actually casted their vote on their conscience or for who they actually thought was the best candidate, that best candidate might actually win. But as of right now, most of the herd still follows what they are led to believe. So if you are considering voting for a different candidate and someone tries to tell you it's a wasted vote, you now know why it's not. Anybody who tries to tell you that either doesn't understand this or they want to suppress your vote into voting for the candidate they want you to vote for. But while we're talking about a wasted vote, not only is this argument false, but it's the exact opposite that is actually true in most states. If you live in a state like California, New Mexico, or New York, it doesn't matter who you vote for. Joe Biden is going to win your state. If you live in Mississippi, Oklahoma, or Tennessee, the same can be said for Donald Trump winning your state. It can easily be argued that if you live in any state that leans heavily in one direction and is already pretty much decided, then voting for either of these guys is a wasted vote. Sorry, that's just the way it's set up. According to TheEconomist.com, the chance of a voter deciding the election in California is 1 in 11 billion. In Oklahoma, it's about 1 in 40 billion. The odds are even higher in many other states. But if you're not comfortable voting for either of them, still undecided, or just want your vote to count towards actual change and real alternative choices in future elections, then remember the 5 and 25% thresholds that were discussed earlier. Your, quote, wasted vote could be what helps decide having that freedom of choice in the next election. And let's stop with the splitting the vote nonsense. A vote for Joe Jorgensen does not take votes away from either Donald Trump or Joe Biden. This is an assumption that everyone or even a majority of those who vote for Joe Jorgensen were going to otherwise vote for Biden or Trump. Neither is true. Most of those people, if they didn't have this choice, would have been divided between the other candidates. Or maybe wouldn't have even voted at all. Because we are stuck in this nonsense, most elections in recent years have not come down to the people voting for who they want as our leader. It's more about voting against who they hate the most. I know very few people who are actually excited to be voting for either of these guys. Yes, there are plenty of Trump loyalists. No matter how obnoxious he is, no matter how often he gets caught in a lie or how often he makes himself out to be a hypocrite, there are people who will defend him no matter what. But many people are kind of stuck in the middle, and they feel like maybe they're obligated to vote towards their party. But even lifelong Republicans and Democrats are coming out to say, this is who we got? This is our guy? But what's happening in relation to current events of 2020 just shows how bad this has gotten, especially on the Joe Biden side. We are in the middle of the biggest civil rights movement in the history of the world. We've been protesting against racism and police brutality. Now you would think many of the things that Joe Biden has said and his record, he's the guy that represents exactly what we were just protesting against. This guy has said some pretty bad things. And we're not just talking about many, many years ago. Some of it, yes. But he's said some of this stuff as recently as weeks ago. He's been saying this stuff throughout his whole career. This is the same guy who wrote the 1994 crime bill, which has led to increased police brutality and the mass incarceration of minorities for victimless crimes. Even if you want to make the case that at the time in 1994 it seemed like the right thing to do, and he had support from others, he still has very recently defended it, even when most people in his own party have come out against it.
Joe Biden is defending what many Democrats now see as all but indefensible, the 1994 crime bill.
When I wrote the crime bill, which you've been conditioned to say is a bad bill.
Even Bill Clinton, who was president at the time, has apologized for it.
4 years ago, as Hillary Clinton faced blistering criticism for the bill, President Clinton apologized.
Because I signed a bill that made the problem worse. And I want to admit it.
That is far more than Biden has said.
Even his own running mate has spoken out against it.
That 1994 crime bill, it did contribute to mass incarceration in our country.
And speaking of, he goes and picks the absolute worst running mate in this environment. He chooses the prosecutor who locked up thousands for nonviolent crimes. How many people do you know who smoke weed? I happen to have a lot of friends that do. You know what? She wanted to send all of them to prison. Really? I mean, for something that is now legal in many states? This is the same person who blocked evidence that could have potentially freed an innocent man who still sits on death row. Why did she do this? She didn't care to find out if an innocent man was being sentenced to death or not. She wanted him to stay on death row and be killed so she could have another win on her record. Do you think she really cares about the people when she has shown that her win-loss record as a prosecutor is what's more important? This was the most systemic person for incarceration that was available. So why would anybody who protested, or at least agrees with the protesters, vote for the very people who are helping create and maintain the system they were protesting against? I'll tell you why. 2 reasons. First, they hate this guy even more, and they believe this guy is their only realistic option. All the while, the next available candidate represents everything they were protesting for. If you look at Jo Jorgensen's platform, everything that was being protested for, she provides. I mean, let's take a look. She's the only candidate who wants to end police brutality, end qualified immunity for police, end no-knock raids, repeal all laws for victimless crimes. She even says she will pardon all who are incarcerated for these victimless crimes. How many people do you know who are still in jail for weed or other nonviolent or victimless crimes? They are there because people like these guys helped create the system to put them there. And this is the person who wants to set them free. It doesn't stop there. She's the only candidate who participated in a Black Lives Matter protest. She's the only candidate who called for the arrest of the officers who killed George Floyd. She has plenty of other quotes that are directly in line with the current civil rights movement. You would think this is the perfect candidate in this current environment. So why aren't more people willing to vote for her? It's almost as if Uncle Sam himself was watching the protests from above and said, okay, I see you guys. I'm going to send you someone that's going to give you everything you want. And then the majority said, nah. The establishment has once again convinced the majority of America they must choose one of their people. The cycle continues. The manipulation is so strong that it is preventing millions of people from voting for the change they actually want. People will fall victim to the system. People will protest against the system. People will get violent because of the system. Unfortunately, when it comes to the greatest action to change it, which is voting against it, we've been duped.